Welcome, fellow geeks, to the Geek Test. My name is Simon, and this is where we here at Bennett's BikeSocial take a new bike and get geeky with it. On the dyno, performance testing, measuring riding position and ergonomics, weighing it, and not forgetting a ride around the Geek Test route of motorways, A roads, B roads, and in town. And the subject of this week's Geek Test is Royal Enfield's Shotgun 650. Royal Enfield is a company with a very long history. In 1893, which was a year before motorcycles were even invented, a bicycle business based in Redditch, near Birmingham, won a contract to supply parts to the Royal Small Arms Factory in Enfield in Middlesex. To commemorate the deal, the company was renamed the Enfield Manufacturing Company, and they named one of their bicycles the Royal Enfield, with a slogan, "Made like a gun," which is a really nice bit of foreshadowing. In 1901, Enfield made their first motorised bicycle by bolting a small 1.5 horsepower motor over the front wheel. Fast forward down the years, in which time the now Royal Enfield added technology like water cooling, introduced in 1903 on its own engine, and then they built a 343cc 2.75 horsepower V-twin in 1911 with chain drive, which came fifth in the junior TT. And in 1920, they built an 850cc inline four. God, what a weapon! Imagine bombing about on that thing in 1920. And we think a litre sports bike feels fast now. Anyway, in 1932, Royal Enfield built the first Bullet, an air-cooled single in 3 versions, a 250, a 350 and a 500cc. After the war, and after the partition of India, in the mid-1950s, Royal Enfield entered an agreement with Madras Motors and formed Enfield India to provide bikes for the Indian Army assembled under licence. And shortly after that, Royal Enfield sold the tooling to manufacture components to Enfield India. So by 1962, they were building complete bikes. Back in the UK, Royal Enfield became part of a great sweeping aside of the British bike industry by cheaper, better, faster Japanese bikes in the 1960s. And by 1970, it was all over. The last Royal Enfield factory in the UK closed its doors. For the next decade, Enfield India carried on making bikes for their domestic market. And in the late 70s, even began exporting them back to the UK, where they found a niche as essentially kind of new old stock for the classic bike enthusiast. And that's pretty much how it remained for decades. Royal Enfields were archaic, ill-handling, slow, cranky old machines whose simplicity and ease of repair kind of suited life in India, but meant almost nothing to the modern, sophisticated touring sports and adventure bike riders of Europe in the 80s and 90s. But times change, and so do riders' tastes. So in the mid-90s, the now officially named Royal Enfield, and a wholly Indian company, was brought into the Eicher Group, a large Indian automotive manufacturer. And slowly but surely, their ambitions for Royal Enfield began to evolve. The 499cc pushrod Electra Clubman Sport single in 2007 included some pretty radical thinking. For example, it had a gear lever on the left. And in 2013, a brand new Bullet was released, a cafe racer style 535cc air-cooled single with double overhead cams making 29 of your Indian bhp. The frame for the Continental GT was designed for Enfield by Harris Performance, a British company more normally associated with modified high-performance road bikes and racing rather than classic bikes. But Sid Lal, the young, charismatic boss of Royal Enfield, liked Harris so much he bought the company, and in 2017 opened a purpose-built, multi-million-pound R&D centre at Bruntingthorpe Proving Ground in Leicestershire. The company was selling an incredible 750,000 bikes a year in their home market, with a bike coming off the production line every 52 seconds. But Sid had plans for global success. Next stop was the first Himalayan single-cylinder adventure bike in 2018, but it was the launch of Royal Enfield's Interceptor and Continental GT 650 twins that really made an impact. Enfield's first twins for half a century, the two bikes shared a 648cc, 46 horsepower, air-cooled parallel twin and had a basic steel tube double cradle frame. The Interceptor was the traditional roadster, the Continental GT had clip-ons and rear sets, and it was the cafe racer. The bikes were launched at a truly whiz-bang international press event at Santa Cruz in California. The press were flown in from around the world, first class, which never happens. Absolutely no expense was spared during the launch, apart from the photography and the videography, which is pretty awful. Anyway, the bikes were incredibly popular, partly because they were cheap, around £5,500 for the base model, and partly because they were simple, good-looking, functional motorbikes that slotted into the rise of that whole urban hipster thing. Now, Wikipedia says their sales in 2020 made them the best-selling bikes in the UK, which BMW might have something to say about, but they were definitely good, popular bikes. And so now we come to the Royal Enfield Shotgun, made like a gun. So what is a shotgun? It's almost impossible to decode Royal Enfield's marketing guff on their website, so I asked VoiceOver Man to have a go, see if it makes more sense.
A century of pure motorcycling DNA collided with the anarchic spirit of custom culture.
Nah, it still makes no sense. The Shotgun is a sort of a mashup of retro, cruiser and a bobber, with even a hint of muscle cruiser with the upside-down forks. It uses the Interceptor twin engine and a new frame shared with the Super Meteor, but according to Royal Enfield, the Shotgun is a base for customising. And to prove it, the bike comes with a detachable subframe and pillion pad, which we didn't get with our bike, which is okay, because no one wants to ride pillion with me anyway. Right, finally, shall we get on with the geek testing? The motive power of the Shotgun is the same 648cc air-cooled fuel-injected parallel twin found in the Interceptor, the Continental GT, the Super Meteor, the Classic 650 and the Bear. It's developed at Royal Enfield's R&D base at Bruntingthorpe from scratch. They say it's a classic bike engine on the outside only, and it's thoroughly modern inside with a one-piece forged crank, 6 gears, fuel injection and a slipper clutch. The motor uses a modern 270-degree crank with a balancer shaft for those pleasant, charismatic vibes. During development, the motor began life as a 600, but it became a 650 when the factory decided the original Interceptor needed more power to, their words, comfortably exceed 100 miles an hour. The motor's air-cooled with deep fins and has a single overhead cam allowing space for that classic rounded-off cam cover look. Along with the massive clutch cover, it's a very convincing classic bike-looking engine. At 78mm bore and 67.8mm stroke, the Shotgun motor is more over-square than you'd imagine. For example, Enfield's 500 twin in the late 60s was almost square. I suppose the nearest modern equivalent I can think of is Kawasaki's air-cooled 650, the W650, from the late 1990s, which was well under square, although I say modern, that's like 25 years ago. It's sobering to think we're almost as far from the W650 now as the W650 was from the last British Royal Enfield in the early 70s. Anyway, as I say, Royal Enfield claimed 46 bhp and 39 pound-foot of torque, so naturally we took the Shotgun down to the dyno at BSD Race Developments in Eye Green, Peterborough, to find out what it's really doing. Now, it's always tricky testing bikes like the Shotgun because they're what I call a subjective style of motorbike. You can measure it, you can measure the power and acceleration and how high the seat is, but really, bikes like this aren't about numbers, they're about feelings, and my feelings might not be the same as your feelings. Anyway, Shotgun isn't designed, I think we can all agree, to be fast in a straight line. It's not designed to be fast round corners. It's not designed to stop like it's hit a wall. And it's not designed to tour Scotland with a huge fuel range. It is designed to look good and make you feel good. And thankfully, they don't make a ruler for that. But this is the Geek Test and it's all about measuring. So on the dyno, the Shotgun makes 43.7 bhp at the back wheel, peaking at 7,200 RPM. And 36.6 pound-foot of torque, peaking at 5,600 RPM, which is pretty close to what Royal Enfield claim, and says to me that they're taking their power figures from somewhere in the powertrain, rather closer to the crank than the back wheel. At first glance, the dyno curves are unremarkable, no major dips or blips, nothing dramatic, but it's actually a fairly peaky motor. It revs pretty hard, and peak torque is fairly close to peak power. It's doing its best work over 2/3 of the way through its usable rev range. Now, let's take something more relevant to the Shotgun, Here it is compared to the Kawasaki W650 I mentioned earlier. This one is from near the end of production in 2003. Okay, so that's interesting. You have to say, it's not a great look for the shotgun. The Kawasaki motor is 676cc, so it's a bit larger. It's also air-cooled. It's 360 degree, not 270 degree. It's also got a single overhead cam, but it's driven by a bevel gear, not cam chain. It's also running on carbs, not fuel injection. And as I mentioned, it's pretty under square compared to the shotgun, but it makes more power and more torque everywhere, and it revs just as hard. Now, I'm as surprised about that as you are. I've ridden a W650 a long time ago, and I don't remember it feeling lively. So why the difference? Well, for a start, the numbers on the graph aren't as far apart as the scaling of the graph implies. There's only a few bhp in it, but it is a fitter motor, so I can only guess it's either because A, beating a 25-year-old Kawasaki engine wasn't really a design priority for Enfield, it's that feelings thing again, or B, the Kawasaki didn't have to contend with Euro 5 Plus, an exhaust catalyst. I suspect it probably wouldn't look quite so healthy if you stuffed a bloody great cork up its exhaust. Anyway, while I was in the mood to plot dyno graphs, the context, here are a couple more. This is the shotgun compared to a Moto Guzzi V7 from 2017. It's a bigger 744cc air-cooled engine, so it's making more power and more torque. But it doesn't rev anywhere near as hard as the Enfield, and its peak torque is just over halfway through its working rev range. And here's another engine, much larger than the shotgun, and it's water-cooled, but maybe it's in a similar part of the market. It's Triumph's Street Twin from 2016, so that was before it was updated in 2017. It's 900cc, so you'd expect lots more power and torque, and indeed there is a lot more of both. But the engine tune is much closer to what you think the Enfield would be. So compared to the shotgun, the Triumph makes only around 20% more peak power, but over 50% more torque than the Enfield. And its torque peaks some 20% of the way into its usable rev range. Don't forget the shotgun's torque peaks about, 75% of its way through the rev range. Anyway, so what does all this mean? Well, it means that despite its air-cooled looks, the shotgun is a fairly peaky engine on paper for a bike that looks like it should be doffing about in a relaxed manner. Which isn't to say you can't doff about on the shotgun. In fact, doffing about is pretty much its thing. I tried riding it like I stole it, but it's completely not the point. As long as you stick to doffing about, the motor is lovely. It's very flat, it's an even power delivery, nothing startling. It'll boogie away from the lights handily enough. If you have to pump it through the gears a bit to keep it flying, and there's no tacho, so you're changing gear by feel. But the transmission is clean, there's rarely any drivetrain lash, although you do have to cog it down a bit to get it going. Top gear is pretty much an overdrive. And speaking of performance, let's have a look at the speed testing. I know it's not really relevant to the shotgun, but anyway, best 0 to 60 time was 6.76 seconds. The best technique was pretty much drop the clutch as soon as the bike's moving, and then give big handfuls between gears. It's not very elegant, and we're comparing apples and oranges here, but they're the only fruit we've got on the Geek Test. That's 2.92 seconds slower than an F900 GSA, 2.96 seconds slower than an R1300 GSA, and it's 2.76 seconds slower than a CBR 600RR. What might be a bit more relevant to the shotgun in terms of performance is how quickly it can shift in top gear, 40 to 60 miles an hour roll-on times. Now, you'd hope this style of engine would give you some lazy, no gear change required top gear performance. But as I said earlier, top gear feels like a bit of an overdrive, and as a result, the shotgun takes 6.7 seconds to go from 40 to 60 miles an hour in top gear in 151 metres. Again, it's not a fair comparison, but CBR 600RR does it in 5.1 seconds and 115 metres, and a GSA R1300 does it in 3.16 seconds. That's less than half the time, and it does it in 72 metres, which is less than half the distance. So, how does all this feel on the road? Well, the shotgun isn't a spud-thudding, old-school torque monster making great gobbets of thrust in a rev range as wide as a fingernail. It's a mild-mannered, flexible, deeply civil engine, entirely predictable, easy to use, no surprises, good or bad. Power delivery is smooth and even, easy to meter accurately at the throttle. You get what you ask for, nothing more, probably a bit less if truth be told. If you crank it up, it'll beat along at a decent tilt, but at those kinds of revs, which you can't actually see, it feels a bit unnecessary on a motor like this, sort of bullying it along, and that's not really doing anyone any favours. If you must know, top speed is somewhere around 95 miles an hour. On a test strip in leathers flat on the tank, probably it'll top the ton, just. But at a practical level, the clutch is light, although the lever action is a bit sort of springy. In practice, it's like either in or out. There's not a lot of finesse at the lever. The gear change is neat and tidy. Obviously no quick shifter, so you slam the long throw throttle shut, reel the clutch in, hoof it into the next ratio, lob the clutch out again, haul back on the cable again. No fly-by-wire here, it's all analogue. It's got a nice sonic accompaniment too. The exhaust is pleasingly loud. I suppose it's partly about your riding environment. If you live in the arse end of nowhere and it's a straight line to get there, then the Shotgun's not really your bike because it hasn't got the legs or the suspension or the riding position. If instead you spend your time scudding about on urban roads or short rural rides, or you don't think every ride is an opportunity to explore the outer limits of a machine's performance, which is weird, doesn't everyone ride like that? Then the Shotgun's twin does a good job with what it's got. Like I said, it's really hard to judge the motor on performance because it's about feel. And if you want me to swerve away from Geek Test empiricism and get into sensations, I have ridden engines that are similarly about feel, and they've left a bigger impression on me than the Shotgun motor. Personally, I think the 270-degree parallel twin can be a bit of a cop-out. It's the vanilla option. It's the one that has a whole load of sound engineering, cost, packaging, component, assembly advantages, but being a truly memorable, essential, stimulating riding experience just for the engine isn't necessarily one of them. I'd say a proper V-twin, or maybe a transverse V, such as a Guzzi, or inline V, however you describe it, or a flat twin, or a 360 or a 180-degree parallel twin, or even a 285-degree parallel twin. They all have balancing or design or packaging or cost downsides, but I would argue they're all more involving and engaging engine designs. But then maybe a lot of modern riders don't value that vibe, literally, and prefer a path of less resistance. Anyway, enough of the subjective, at least for a while. Let's get into some more facts. The Shotgun frame was debuted on the Super Meteor and also features on the classic 650. It's a central steel tube spine running under the tank with the flying seat supported at the back on a steel plate. A thick strut from the headstock bolts to the top of the barrels, and another pair of struts grip the front of the crankcases. At the back, a pair of steel tube loops hold the rear shocks, the silencers and the footrest assemblies, while a hidden pair of pressed steel plates grip the rear of the crankcases and hold the swing arm. A pressed steel subframe carries the rear hugger skin, and when it's fitted, a pillion pad sits on a bolted-on rack, which is a pretty cool luggage rack if you want to remove the seat. Suspension is by Showa, at least the 43mm forks are because it says so on the top. They're unadjustable and they're upside down for that authentic modern retro modern look. The shocks are also made by Showa with 5-stage preload adjustment. Genuinely retro because it's that stepped collar design. I set the rear suspension on maximum preload, partly for anatomical reasons, partly to get as much ground clearance as possible. Because it turns out there's a pretty full toolkit under the Shotgun side panel. There's plenty of roadside repair capacity in there. There's also a USB port for charging your toolkit, and also for adjusting preload. Mind your knuckles, mate! Anyway, leaning a bike like the Shotgun far enough over to get the pegs down is not big and it's not clever, but it is fun, especially if you have a GoPro hanging off the back. The sparks are very pretty. It reminds me of the days when we'd lap roundabouts with titanium knee sliders, and the only way we could get to watch the sparks was to twist the inside mirror down so you could see your own reflection. Anyway, back to the Shotgun chassis. To round it off, we have an 18-inch front and a 17-inch rear on cast rims. So how does it all work? Well, again, what's the context? For the quality of the ride, if you stamp on over bumpy roads, and I did, the 90mm of rear suspension travel has a lot of damping to cram into a very small space. It's not great, and the bigger the potholes get, the less great it is. Big bumps go straight through the suspension, into the frame and into the rider. And ask the Shotgun to go around a corner at the same time, and that suspension travel effectively gets even less. So it's pretty harsh or direct, and only gets better either by slowing down or riding over better roads. But Thanks to the shotgun's wheelbase, it's shorter than the Super Meteor, but it's still 2.5 inches longer than the Interceptor. Stability is never an issue. You just have to sort of grip hold of the thing and hang on, wincing occasionally. At more conventional speeds, the shotgun handles, I don't know, it's okay. It steers lightly, accurately. It's easy to point it in the right direction. I rode it in all kinds of slime and slipperiness, never got a wheel out of 9. With only 44 horsepower and limited ground clearance, the suspension control isn't going to be seriously challenged in terms of handling by the motor. And it really, all it has to do is be comfy and compliant. It's a kind of you had just one job situation. Along country back roads, the suspension gets a bit bouncy and underdamped over ripples and changes of camber. It'll bongo around. It's never out of control. Actually, the forks are pretty good. Most of the low frequency movement comes from the back of the bike, and those twin shocks, they're more like biro than Showa. If I owned a shotgun, they'd be the first items I'd upgrade. K-Tech makes the Razor Light for £748 for the pair, which have adjustable preload, rebound and shock length. Or there's the Razor Piggyback, which adds compression adjustment for £1,144 if you're serious about your back end. Or you can also get shocks from, I don't know, YSS or Nitron. They don't list a specific unit, but I'm sure they'll make something. Brakes are by Bybri, the budget Brembo brand. Try saying that 5 times. I should say brake singular, really, because the shotgun has just got the one 320mm front disc gripped by a 2-pot sliding axial caliper, which certainly looks vintage, not in a good way. And the back is a hefty 300mm disc, also using a 2-pot caliper. And before you ask, it's different part numbers. In our braking test, 60 miles an hour to a standstill, the shotgun actually proved pretty tricky to stop because of the size of the handlebar grips and the shape of the lever. The grips are really fat and the lever is wide and flat, so actually wrapping your fingers around it with enough strength to squeeze it and yet keeping a grip on the bars, it's a bit tricky. My wrist kept rolling under and twisting the throttle open. Maybe I should grow longer fingers. I don't think the feel at the lever helped either. There's not much feel or finesse. It sort of reminds me of when custom bike builders in the 1990s used to fit aftermarket 6-pot calipers and braided hoses, which didn't match the standard master cylinder bore ratio. So you ended up with brakes that looked great on spec panels, but were like squeezing a lump of wood compared to the OE brakes. Anyway, the best I managed with smoke coming off the caliper was 2.88 seconds, or more importantly, 38 metres. That's pulling 0.9 G. Looking back at our apples and oranges chart, a CBR 600RR did it in 26.3 metres, and the 1300 GSA stopped in 32 metres. So it takes a shotgun a car and a half further to stop from 60 miles an hour. I think we can safely say that adding an extra disc up front and stickier tyres might get some of that back. But again, the bike can only work with what it's given. Braking effectiveness is about a lot more than just calipers and discs. It's also about steering geometry, centre of gravity, and about weight balance. And, speaking of weight, we plopped the shotgun on the Geek Test scales and, against a claimed curb weight of 240 kilograms at 90% fuel and oil, we measured 230 kilograms with a full tank. It's rare to weigh a bike and find it's less than the manufacturer claims, especially by this much. So I'm wondering if Royal Enfield are quoting their weight figure with the fairly substantial pillion subframe and seat still fitted. It looks like it could account for those extra kilos. Anyway, the shotgun is a pretty chunky fella. A fully fueled F900 GS Adventure with 10 litres more fuel is only 250 kilos. That said, the shotgun is predominantly made of metal. I can't remember the last time I rode a bike with so little plastic on it. Side panels, tank, aluminium headlamp shroud, mud guards. And it's a good thing, which I'll get onto in a moment. But from a purely practical point of view, the shotgun only feels heavy when you push it around. And all bikes of this style tend to feel heavier than they really are because you can't get your body weight behind them, so you're always pushing down. And the foot pegs always bash on your shins. But on the move, it all goes away. The shotgun is easy to hustle along between cars, shimmy around, nipping in and out of town, dodging traffic at low speed. The shotgun's riding position is very natural. It's not so low as to be cramped for a 6-footer, but its 795mm seat height makes it manageable for all shapes and sizes. Your feet are in a good position. I'm glad Royal Enfield resisted the urge to move the pegs too far forward, where you can't use them to brace yourself against the acceleration. But they're not so far back that it makes your knees ache. It's just a really nice sitting position. Good seat too, plenty of width for the wider posterior. So I spent the Geek Test riding day happily bombing about. I didn't even think about me bum or aches or pains. Clearly, the faster you go and the longer you spend doing it, it starts to get a bit tiresome. I spent about half an hour on the motorway and some dual carriageways, and that was plenty. While I think about it, let's talk fuel consumption. Now, I've stopped running Geek Test bikes out of fuel completely because it turns out it can damage the cats. And seeing as I'm a bit of a cat person, that's not a good thing. So instead, we're now measuring fuel consumption the usual way. Brim the tank, reset the trip, run it as low as we dare, then refill and work out how many miles we did on that amount of fuel. And by doing that, I got 95 miles from the claimed 13.8 litre tank. That was over 17 miles into the reserve range with the fuel light on and fuel gauge flashing 1 bar. But the tank only took 10.3 litres to fill back up, so that means there was, according to my Casio calculator, 3.5 litres left. So at 41.8 miles per gallon, that means there was still 32 miles left in the tank, which means the shotgun's entire reserve range is about 50 miles, or a third the total range of the tank. Which goes to show, just because you're fuel paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to run you out. Not a huge amount of equipment to talk about. The shotgun's got ABS, of course. There's no traction control or rider modes. I mean, there's not even a tacho. You get 2 trips, a fuel gauge, reserve fuel indicator, gear position indicator, and there's an eco indicator to show you when you're not hammering it, which, to be fair, you sort of know if you are anyway. Our bike had the optional Tripper, which is a turn-by-turn navigator that works via Bluetooth with the Royal Enfield app. If you like that kind of thing, I'm a bit too old to figure all that stuff out. So in the absence of a long list of electronics to talk about, we can talk about the old-fashioned stuff like, hey, switchgear. And it's nice to see Royal Enfield have kept it looking appropriate for the bike. Squint, and the switches are kind of made of Bakelite. But what they aren't is cheap looking. In fact, the whole cockpit area has a kind of solid pre-war industrial look to it. And let's get into the finish and the styling of the bike, because really, even though this isn't what the Geek Test is about, it's what the shotgun is very much about. And although I'm the last person you'd go to for style advice, I have to say I think the shotgun is a proper job. It looks great. When you're spudding about in town, you feel like other people think it looks great too. And this is where the thing about the bike being predominantly made of metal really comes into its own. There's not a hint of plasticky about it. It's got a functional, almost industrial aesthetic, kind of bare bones, back to basics, but with a flourish of days gone by. I like the bobber nod with the flying C, the faintly military colour of the green drill paint scheme. Fit and finish is good too. The filler cap is nice and solid. I appreciate Royal Enfield adding a clever bit of double skinning to the exhaust headers to stop them looking weedy. I think Triumph do that as well. And I like the chunky feel of it all. I wish it had better brakes. I wish it had better suspension. And I wish it had thinner grips. But apart from that, there's not a lot I'd actually want to change about the bike, which is ironic given that it's predominantly about customising. Anyway, the price. The Royal Enfield Shotgun costs £6,699 on the road. Over a 3-year PCP deal, that's about £95 a month, with just over £3,000 to find at the end of it if you want to keep the bike. That's about £100 less than the Super Meteor Cruiser, about £300 more than an Interceptor, and it's £100 more than my favourite, the Continental GT. As for rivals, I guess you could say Kawasaki's Eliminator 500, which is a very traditional Japanese manufacturer's take on the theme. It's not the prettiest bike, it's a bit of a mess in terms of styling. It's got a smaller engine, and it won't surprise you, I haven't ridden one, but I refuse to have anything to do with anything called Eliminator, apart from the obvious. And what else is there? There's Honda's CMX 500 Rebel, that's 5699, but it's a bit too custom cruiser really. To be honest, for me, the shotgun kind of sits at the bottom price-wise of those bobber style bikes. Triumph's Bonneville Bobber, which is about £13,000, or Indian Scout Bobber, which is also about £13,000, so basically twice the price, which sort of puts the shotgun in a class of one at its price point and performance, which is the same trick Royal Enfield pulled when they launched the Interceptor, and which means really the shotgun's nearest rivals are probably either the Interceptor or the Super Meteor. Right, I feel I have detained you long enough with my wittering. As always, please like, subscribe, comment down below, get your bike insurance from Bennett's, become a BikeSocial member, the link is down below, and get your motorcycling podcasts from Front End Chatter. And all that remains for me to say is thank you very much for watching.